"Eat," said the smith. "There is no danger in it now that you will not be breaking bread with the rider. You see how quickly you saw the peril of that. Just as you knew there would be no greater peril than in riding with him. Follow your nose through the day, boy. Just follow your nose." He called to the horse. "Martha!" He called to the house. "Martha!" The woman came out again with her basket. This time she drew back her shawl and smiled at Will. He saw blue eyes like the rider's, but with a softer light in them. Gratefully he munched at the warm crusty bread, which had been split now and spread with honey. Then beyond the clearing there was a new sound of muffled footfalls in the road, and he spun fearfully round. A white mare, without rider or harness, trotted into the clearing toward them. A reverse image of the rider's midnight black stallion, tall and splendid and without marking of any kind, against the dazzle of the snow, glittering now as the sun re-emerged from cloud. There seemed a faint golden glow in the whiteness and in the long mane falling over the arched neck. The horse came to stand beside Will, bent its nose briefly, and touched his shoulder, as if in greeting, then tossed its great white head, blowing a cloud of misty breath in the cold air. Will reached out and laid a reverent hand on its neck. You come in good time," the smith said. "The fire is hot." He went back to the forge and pumped once or twice at the bellows arm, so that the fire roared. Then he hooked down a shoe from the shadowed wall beyond and thrust it into the heat. "Look well," he said, studying Will's face. "You've not seen a horse like this ever before, but this will not be the last time." "She's beautiful," Will said, and the mare nuzzled again gently at his neck. "Mount," said the smith. Will laughed. It was so obviously impossible. His head reached scarcely to the horse's shoulder, and even if there had been a stirrup it would have been far out of reach of his foot. "I'm not joking," said the smith, and indeed he did not look the kind of man who often smiled, let alone made a joke. "It is your privilege. Take hold of the mane, where you can reach it, and you will see." To humor him, Will reached up and wound the fingers of both hands in the long coarse hair of the white horse's mane, low on the neck. In the same instant he felt giddy, his head hummed like a spinning top, and behind the sound he heard quite plainly, but very far off, the haunting bell-like phrase of music he had heard before waking that morning. He cried out, his arms jerked strangely, the world spun, and the music was gone. His mind was still groping desperately to recover it, when he realized he was closer to the snow-thick branches of the trees than he had been before, sitting high on the white mare's broad back. He looked down at the smith and laughed aloud in delight. "When she has stood," the smith said, "she will carry you if you ask." Will sobered, suddenly thinking. Then something drew his gaze up through the arching trees to the sky, and he saw 2 black rooks flapping lazily past high up. "No," he said, "I think I am supposed to go alone." He stroked the mare's neck, swung his legs to one side, and slid the long way down, bracing himself for a jolt, but he found that he landed lightly on his toes in the snow. "Thank you, John. Thank you very much. Goodbye." The smith nodded briefly, then busied himself with the horse, and Will trudged off in some disappointment. He had expected a word of farewell at least, from the edge of the trees. He glanced back. John Smith had one of the mare's hind feet clenched between his knees, and was reaching his gloved hand for the tongs. And what Will saw then made him forget any thought or words of farewell. The smith had done no removing of old horseshoes, or trimming of the shoe-torn foot. This horse had never been shod before, and the shoe that was now being fitted on its foot, like the line of 3 other shoes he could now see glinting on the far smithy wall, was not a horseshoe at all, but another shape, a shape he knew very well. All 4 of the white mare's shoes were replicas of the cross-quartered circle that he wore in his own belt. Will walked a little way down the road, beneath its narrow roof of blue sky. He put a hand inside his jacket to touch the circle on his belt, and the iron was icy cold. He was beginning to know what that meant by now, but there was no sign of the rider. He could not even see any tracks left by the black horse's feet. And he was not thinking of evil encounters. He could feel only that something was drawing him more and more strongly toward the place where in his own time Dawson's farm would stand. He found the narrow side lane and turned down it. The track went on a long way, winding in gentle turns. There seemed to be a lot of scrub in this part of the forest. The branching tops of small trees and bushes jutted snow-laden from the mounding drifts, like white antlers from white rounded heads. And then round the next bend Will saw before him a low square hut with rough-daubed clay walls and a roof, high with a hat of snow, like a thick iced cake. In the doorway, paused irresolute with one hand on the rickety door, stood the shambling old tramp of the day before. The long gray hair was the same, and so were the clothes and the wizened crafty face. Will came to the old man and said, as Farmer Dawson had said the day before, "So, the walker is abroad." "Only the one," said the old man. "Only me. And what's it to you?" He sniffed, squinting sideways at Will, and rubbed his nose on one greasy sleeve. "I want you to tell me some things," Will said, more boldly than he felt. "I want to know why you were hanging around yesterday, why you were watching, why the rooks came after you. I want to know," he said in a sudden honest rush, "what it means that you are the walker." At the mention of the rooks, the old man had flinched closer to the hut, his eyes flickering nervously up at the tree-tops, but now he looked at Will in sharper suspicion than before. "You can't be the one," he said. "I can't be what?" "You can't be. You ought to know all this, especially about those hellish birds. Trying to trick me, eh? Trying to trick a poor old man. You're out with the rider, aren't you? You're his boy, ain't you, eh?" "Of course not," Will said. "I don't know what you mean." He looked at the wretched hut. The lane ended here, but there was scarcely even a proper clearing. The trees stood close all round them, shutting out much of the sun. He said, suddenly desolate, "Where's the farm?" "There isn't any farm," said the old tramp impatiently. "Not yet. You ought to know." He sniffed again violently and mumbled to himself. Then his eyes narrowed and he came close to Will, peering into his face, giving off a strong repellent smell of ancient sweat and unwashed skin. "But you might be the one, you might, if you're carrying the first sign that the old one gave you. Have you got it there, then? Show us. Show the old walker the sign." Trying hard not to back away in disgust, Will fumbled with the buttons of his jacket. He knew what the sign must be, but as he pushed the sheepskin aside to show the circle looped on his belt, his hand brushed against the smooth iron and felt it burning, biting with icy cold. At the same moment he saw the old man leap backwards, cringing, staring not at him but behind him over his shoulder. Will swung round and saw the cloaked rider on his midnight horse. "Well met," said the rider softly. The old man squealed like a frightened rabbit and turned and ran, blundering through the snowdrifts into the trees. Will stood where he was, looking at the rider, his heart thumping so fiercely that it was hard to breathe. "It was unwise to leave the road, Will Stanton," said the man in the cloak, and his eyes blazed like blue stars. The black horse edged forward. Will shrank back against the side of the flimsy hut, staring into the eyes, and then, with a great effort, he made his slow arm pull aside his jacket so that the iron circle on his belt showed clear. He gripped the belt at its side. The coldness of the sign was so intense that he could feel the force from it, like the radiation of a fierce burning heat. And the rider paused then. His eyes flickered. "So you have one of them already." He hunched his shoulders strangely, and the horse tossed its head. Both seemed to be gaining strength, but growing taller. "One will not help you, not alone, not yet," said the rider, and he grew and grew, looming against the white world, while his stallion neighed triumphantly, rearing up on its forefeet, lashing the air so that Will could only press himself helpless against the wall. Horse and rider towered over him like a dark cloud, blotting out both snow and sun. And then, dimly, he heard new sounds, and the rearing black shape seemed to fall to one side, swept away by a blazing golden light, brilliant with fierce patterns of white-hot circles, suns, stars. Will blinked and saw suddenly that it was the white mare from the smithy, rearing over him in turn. He grabbed frantically at the waving mane, and just as before he found himself jerked up onto the broad back, bent low over the mare's neck, clutching for his life. The great white horse let out a shrieking cry and leapt for the track, through the trees, passing the shapeless black cloud that hung motionless in the clearing, like smoke, passing everything in a rising gallop, until they came at last to the road, Huntercombe Lane, the road through Hunter's Combe. The movement of the great horse changed to a slow-rising, powerful lope, and Will heard the beating of his own heart in his ears as the world flashed by in a white blur. Then all at once grayness came around them, and the sun was blacked out. The wind wrenched into Will's collar and the sleeves and boot tops, ripping at his hair. Great clouds rushed toward them out of the north, closing in one huge gray-black thunderheads. The sky rumbled and growled. One white-misted gap remained, with a faint hint of blue behind it still. But it too was closing. The white horse leapt at it desperately. Over his shoulder, Will saw swooping toward them a darker shape even than the giant clouds. The rider, towering, immense. His eyes, two dreadful points of blue-white fire. Lightning flashed, thunder split. The sky and the mare leapt at the crashing clouds as the last gap closed. And they were safe. The sky was blue before and above them. The sun blazing warmly. Will's skin, he saw. The sun warming Will's skin. He saw that they had left his Thames Valley behind, and they were now among the curving slopes of the Chiltern Hills, capped with great trees, beech and oak and ash, and running like threads through the snow. Along the lines of the hills were the hedges that were the marks of ancient fields, very ancient, as Will had always known, more ancient than anything in his world except the hills themselves, and the trees. Then, on one white hill, he saw a different mark. The shape was cut through snow and turf into the chalk beneath the soil. It would have been hard to make out if it had not been familiar, but Will knew it. The mark was a circle, quartered by a cross. Then his hands were jerked away from their tight clutch on the thick mane, and the white mare gave a long, shrill, whinnying cry that was loud in his ears, and then strangely died away far into the distance. And Will was falling, yet he knew no shock of the fall, but knew only that he was lying face down on cold snow. He stumbled to his feet, shaking himself. The white horse was gone, the sky was clear, and the sunshine warm on the back of his neck. He stood on a snow-mounted hill, with a copse of tall trees capping it far beyond, and two blackbirds drifting tiny to and fro above the trees, and before him, standing alone on the white slope leading to nowhere, were two great carved wooden doors. And that is the end of the chapter.